Right. Thanks for reminding me. That would have been a disaster. Um, so just to recap, what we're looking at here is the evolution of leadership and leadership thinking. Um, in chapter two, that leadership is often looked upon as being something to be achieved, a prize to be had. Um, and while people are in leadership positions, some people like it, or some people like the leader, some people hate the leader. And though it's something that's all pervasive, it's often not understood very well. And that leadership has a number of studies that have been taking place as seen through all of the different programs that have existed. Any of you are familiar with Tony Robbins by chance? No? Ever came across the textbooks, the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People? There's a
No,
new, yes, Chantal? No?
I said no. I'm not familiar.
Okay. Any of you are familiar with any of the people outside there who get involved with leadership um, programs and leadership seminars? Or
Yes, sir.
yeah, Alicia, which one did you get involved with?
So the one with the leadership in me.
That one? Great. All
Hmm.
right. What was the experience like?
It was a phenomenal experience, actually. We everyone get to explore the creative side of their minds, like the things you think,
Mhm.
to put it into practice
Good. All right.
and be creative with it.
So hopefully you can utilize some of that with what we're going to be doing here, and um, you know, bring out even more potential leadership in yourself. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Um, as I said before, one of the things that a lot of these leadership programs strive on, especially the more popular ones, is the charisma of the person that is at the forefront of the program and the charisma of the presenters. It's usually going to be something along those lines. I remember when I was doing this program here, the habits of the highly effective people. Stephen Covey died in during that period. It was quite interesting to see how the presenters from his program basically sort of what's the word I want to use? How they reacted to his death. And since then, he was putting together a final book called The Eight um, Habit of Effective People, and it didn't have as much impact as the previous ones. But I know a lot of people look at the different types of individuals who run these programs, and they have a very I know, for example, somebody used to tell me that they found Stephen Covey to be almost like a cult, which is something that we're going to visit in a little bit in terms of the nature of how these leadership programs work. Because a lot of them are highly psychological and really try to speak to changing mindsets, and changing mindsets like this program here, behavioral thinking, is sometimes comes across as being very psychological in nature. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at here would indicate that to you. So again, the problem that the leadership, oh, here comes Fabian. Hi Fabian, welcome.
Hi, sir. Good evening.
You have an adjustment to your program in terms of presentation. You have a new member. Friday, the person who was there before left unenrolled from class. So obviously they had some sort of issue or some clash or the other. So you need to touch base with Friday. They're on today. Hopefully you'll be able to reach out on WhatsApp and be able to get in contact with them. All right. You good with that, Fabian?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So as I said before, because leadership is so personal and is so emotive in nature, what we find happening is that defining leadership is very difficult. So as there are 17 of us in class here, we would have 17 different perceptions of what leadership is, all right, and how to define it. So the question that I asked at the end there, what is your perception of leadership, is something that you need to engage with on a personal level. How do you look at it? And you'll notice that there are lots of things that impact upon how leadership is viewed. And it would change if we had a more multicultural background of students here. We'd see people from different countries look at leadership from different perspectives as well. So that's something that's going to be problematic across the board, or creates some of the issues that we have. Now, primarily, one of the main things that we look for leaders to do is to help us deal with the issues that we face. And one of the, well, I've listed a number of issues that we face from a global perspective: climate change, globalization, poverty, access to healthcare, education. Can you think of anything else that for us in Trinidad is uh, issue that's facing us? Would you consider crime and to be one of those issues that we face, or you'd be concerned with as a leader? Yes, no, maybe.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else comes to mind? No?
So I don't know if this is one, but the first thing that comes to mind is food shortage. I don't know if it's that.
Yeah. Again, well, that might relate to poverty. But yes, food shortages and food security in terms of a wider perspective might be something that is of concern. Yes. And again, as there are individuals in class, the issues that we would like our leaders to treat with is going to vary based upon what is of concern to us from an individual perspective. And that is what makes defining leadership as successful or not a critical issue. So one of the things that comes up is that when we have all these issues and we come across our leaders who are working, a lot of times they end up disappointing us. And because of them disappointing us, we start to, as I say, leads to despair and distrust of the leadership, and create something called an anti-leadership vaccine. Now, what does that mean? It means that because the the positions of leadership bring with it so much problems and so much distrust and despair and negativity, people become less willing to take on the challenges of leadership because societies have grown distrustful of the people that step forward and offer themselves as leaders. So the issue here now is that although becoming a leader is a good thing, it is also a very exhausting and frustrating thing. And what we find happening as a result, especially that I've observed, is that because of the way in which we treat leaders, because of the past history that we've had with them, we have a tendency to attract the least qualified individuals for positions of leadership because they're the only ones who feel that they can take it on, and they're willing to put up with all the distrust and all of the negativity of the leadership position. So that's something that creates a lot of problems in terms of getting the right fit of individuals in leadership positions, because the problem that we have um, is that the right people may shy away because of the level of social distrust that takes place in terms of it. And that's something that I find some of our political leaders, for example, are not necessarily going to be the best people to step forward and represent us at that level. And most of us, when we think of a political leader, we always think about, well, what is in it for them? How are they benefiting from being involved in that leadership position? What kind of of corruption are they dealing with, to put it mildly? All right. Now, lots of research has gone into the area of leadership, and that research up to this point can help us to identify the truths and the fantasies about what leadership is all about, or as what they talk about here, the myths of leadership. So let's get into the myths. Um, okay, Malik is on the way in. Hi Malik, welcome. That's Mr. Morrison. All right, welcome aboard. All right. So here we're looking at the myths of leadership. So let's look at these myths. Leaders are born, not made. The research tells us that's a myth. Leadership is hierarchical. You need to have formal positions or status to be considered a leader. You have to have charisma to be an effective leader. There is one standard way of leading. It is impossible to be a manager and a leader at the same time, and you only need to have common sense to be an effective leader. So these are the myths of leadership. So what are the truths? The truths, let's start by dismantling. Leaders are made, not born. Um, and this model is going to is hinged upon this understanding of this myth. Everybody has the potential for leadership. It's a matter of whether or not they're willing to take up the reins of leadership. And more importantly, they can be prepared for leadership positions through training and through um, the influence of different types of developmental processes that take place. So a person's environment can influence the development of leadership skills and interests. Leaders are not born with the innate characteristics or skills predisposing them of being leaders. And those are the traditional things. Leadership is something that can be developed. And this program would not exist, and all of the multitude of others would not exist if that weren't the case. Now, this doesn't mean that we're grooming people to be leaders of the world, so to speak. But what we're talking about here is being leaders in your life. In the areas of or the spheres of influence that you have, you can be a leader and contribute from that position. All right, it doesn't mean that we're trading people for all forms of leadership, which is one of the things that a lot of us have to consider. Leadership is not only in the realms of what is seen by everybody in society, but leadership from the simple places like just in your home. Those are the things that a lot of us don't view as being leadership, but it is in fact leadership. All right, another myth here or truth. Leadership occurs at all levels of an organization. And this is what I mean. Regardless of where you are in an organization, you can posit yourself as a leader within that organization, regardless of if you're at the bottom level of the organization or somewhere in the middle. It doesn't matter, because leadership is a state of mind. It's about trying to get others to work with you to accomplish goals. Remember that definition we started with. So newer organizations try to adapt and a more flattened type of hierarchical system rather than the traditional pyramid systems that exist still in a lot of organizations, where you have somebody who's a leader at the top. What you're trying to create is domains of leadership in and around the organization on a flattened structure, so that each person takes leadership of the area that they're running, the area that they are responsible for, and they empower people in their areas to not only achieve the goals but themselves to become leaders as they speak across the board. All right. So that's something that we have to look at in terms of leadership occurring at all levels of an organization. Now, not all people will encourage this type of thing, because once you start to encourage people as leadership throughout the organization, it challenges you, and that challenging is something you have to be mature enough to be able to deal with. Charisma is not a prerequisite for leadership, and there's a tricky thing about charisma, because charisma is something that is, as Yukos says here, profound and unusual effect on followers. So charisma is something that happens when people respond to somebody, not necessarily because of what they say, but how they say things and how they are viewed by other people. And that is a breeding ground for dangerous things to happen. Um, because as many charismatic leaders who have done good things have existed, we have lots of examples of charismatic people who've done really bad things. So Drucker here speaks to the three most charismatic leaders in the last century inflicted the most amount of suffering on the human race. And he's referring to Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. Now, Hitler, you should remember from our first chapter presentation where we spoke about him. Stalin, we also met him there. Um, Stalin was the leader and creator of the Soviet Union. Hitler was in charge of Germany during World War II. And Mao, anybody knows who Mao is referring to? No, nobody knows Chairman Mao.
Yes, sir.
Who's Chairman Mao?
Wasn't he like the leader of China?
Yes, he led the movement of the Chinese movement into communism, and he also um, led China into a very dark period of its life. And a lot of Chinese people died from starvation and whatnot during that period. It was Mao and another guy who I can't remember his name. Pit Pao or something along those lines. I can't remember. All right. So let's look at these groupings of individuals. How many of you all recognize? Well, this is Hitler here. We know. How many of you guys? And we met this gentleman before in another photograph. This is Martin Luther King. These are charismatic leaders. They were known to be very charismatic in the way in which they spoke and were able to influence people to do a lot of things. Do you recognize the other two people, the other two gentlemen? Anybody?
And he's the
Delicia?
one on top.
Sorry? Go ahead,
I
Friday.
think
So one is
Gandhi.
Mahatma Gandhi.
Right. What was
Right.
what did he do that in terms of social change? Do you remember?
No, sir. I recall
No,
right
sir.
now.
All right. So he led India to independence and in a very similar manner that Martin Luther King did. In fact, Martin Luther King kind of took his guide from Mahatma Gandhi through a lack of violence. So they would protest without violence. The only problem is that unfortunately, a lot of things didn't go the way he would have wanted them to. If you ever get a chance, you can look at the movie Mahatma Gandhi with what's his name? That actor Ben Kingsley. He played the role of Mahatma Gandhi, um, and you could get a pretty good biographical information about how things went and the parts in which he didn't like, especially the annexing of India and Pakistan. That separation led to a lot of problems in relation to that. What about this gentleman down in the corner here? Anybody recognize him? I'm using some vague things because these are all charismatic people. No?
Didn't
Anybody
he also
remember
work for CIA?
CIA? Well, no, he's a reverend. He's the Reverend Jim Jones. Anybody remembers him now that I used the name?
Oh, yes, sir. No.
What's he
Yes.
what's he infamous for?
Um, is it that cult that everybody drank?
poisoning Kool-Aid.
Yeah,
and Joe
that
Louis
phrase that
over
we
there.
that phrase that we use now called drinking the Kool-Aid
Yeah.
comes from him and what he did. And he was very highly charismatic, but extremely he was a narcissist and um, a whole set of things. So there have been a whole set of cults that have centered around charismatic people um, who've led people into some very nefarious types of activities that people believe and then eventually end up doing some really ridiculous things afterwards. In terms of his case here, in Guyana, they committed mass suicides through that drinking of Kool-Aid laced with cyanide. It was quite interesting to read about that.
So David Koresh could be
Yeah,
compared with him as well.
of course, similar, and they had
Yeah.
similar ideologies as well. If you look at their backgrounds, it's called the David Koresh and the Davidians. All right. Um, it's a weird type of thing where he was the only one allowed to have children and be with everybody's wives, and he had and you think is a set of uneducated you know backward people that would be in their organizations, but no, highly qualified individuals with a lot of skills, intellectual individuals, and he was able to, in both instances, both him and David Koresh were able to influence these people to join his movement, become committed to the point that he forbade, and this is David Koresh, he forbade them from sleeping with their wives and from having sex with them, and then he eventually started to take over that role and responsibility in the in the cults that he developed, and then eventually the FBI and the alcohol and tobacco bureau of whatever they got involved and they made a mess of the whole thing. You could look at it. There are lots of podcasts about how that development took place and the history and that. You could do some reading about it as well. And this is the problem with charismatic leadership, because it is not about charismatic leaders influence us through our feelings, our thoughts, and how we feel when we're around them. Now, I don't know if you've ever been around somebody who is charismatic, and there's a feeling that is developed, and that is where the danger lies in terms of of how people become motivated. And primarily, one of the things that they talk about is that the only time really charismatic leaders can get these great things happening is when there is conflict in society, when there is something going wrong, and they utilize that general feeling of ill will to put forward a better idea of taking people into the promised land, kind of speak, so that's where the things like "I have a dream" comes from, and Mahatma Gandhi leading people into the salt mines thing, and Hitler talking about the concept of the Aryan race and the leadership here, and of course Jim Jones leading people into the hinterlands of Guyana to set up the what do you call it, by the euphoric society or something along those lines. It's really ridiculous the way in which, and it's because people feel good when they listen to these people that they respond. Um, but as we can see before, some is for good and some will be for bad. And just as many good that there are outside there, there's just as many bad ones, especially when leaders are unable to curb their own selfish desires and wants. That's something that we're going to look at. All right, so another truth, there is not just one right way to lead. So leadership requires the use of several different styles and skills to be able eh, to achieve the goals that you're looking for. So that most times what you find happening is that every individual comes with their own style of leadership. And that style, it would be influenced by their backgrounds and their well, as I talk about, their gender, their cultural identities, or personal value systems. And more importantly, is that the context in which they are exercising leadership also determines the correct style of leadership that you can work with. So, for example, the type of leadership that you might utilize in a classroom is not necessarily going to be the type of leadership you would utilize in a voluntary uh, type of organization, because you might alienate people if you utilize classroom style management in that scenario. So there is no just one way in which things are done. It has to vary based upon the person themselves as well as the environment they find themselves operating in. Um, the importance of distinguishing between management and lead. So remember, the myth was that you can't be a manager and a leader at the same time. And the theory is saying that there are differences between management and leadership. Primarily, managers are focused on, as we talked about this before in chapter 1, management is focused upon achieving outcomes for the organization. Primarily, that is going to be profitability. And that profitability is going to be seen through how best they are able to organize the factors of production that are available in the organization to be able to get maximum output from it. So that's their primary goal. How they go about doing it is a matter of their leadership style, because therein lies the issue, because you have the situation there that some leaders or managers, I say, use a very um, um, they use a very what we refer to as exterior type of or autocratic style of getting things done. They yell at people and they tell them go and do this, and they ridicule people when they don't get it done. That type of stuff. You also have the more democratic style, but that has to do with the leadership style, not the management decisions that they're making. So there's the distinction that they're looking at. The managers have to work within the realms of the goals of the organization, and they have to do it according to what is they've been told, or what is advised to them, or what exists in the industry as doing it the right way. All right. So managers are preoccupied with doing things the right way, whereas leaders are focused on doing the right thing. And there may be a dichotomy between the two, because far too often we've seen organizations behave in a manner in which they are following the rules within which they have to play, but it doesn't mean that it's best for the people who are involved or the wider society that is affected by the decisions that the firms are making. These things. So those are things that we want to pay attention to. So those are some of the distinctions between management and leadership that they speak about. Um, the issue here is that there is overlap between the two. So manage getting managerial tasks completed utilizing a better leadership system, you might find that you're more successful if you use something that is more motivational and encourages people to perform at their best, rather than dictating to people what they need to do and how you want it done. This is something that you may be experiencing where you work, um, that you have particular managers who are just plain better leaders. You're able to work with them easily and without the kind of headache and heartache that you might experience with another manager who has poor leadership potential. But they're still a manager, but their job is to get something done. But the way in which they go about getting it done is is going to be something that is like pulling teeth. I don't know if you've ever worked for anybody like that, who somebody whose leadership style is very aggressive and domineering, as opposed to somebody who's more motivational and encouraging. I've worked with both sets, and I'll tell you that the better experience is always going to be with somebody who's a better leader as opposed to a manager. Now, the problem that we face though is that sometimes in different organizations, people who are seen as more effective leaders may not necessarily be an effective manager, because a lot of people may see the effective leadership potential as being softer, and they may want to take advantage of that circumstance or situation, and that is something that has to, that the person who's involved in management has to balance between their management and leadership skills. It's something that's a fine line for them to walk on, or to walk through, because there are some issues that are that sometimes good leaders in management positions, they're good leaders, but they're just not getting the work done. And that at the end of the day, you have to remember the business needs you to perform. And unfortunately, it doesn't always work the way that you'd like it to. So sometimes you have to put your foot down and get tough with people, to get them to do what they're supposed to do, rather than trying to motivate people, which would make them want to do the things they ought to do, that type of thing. All right. So leadership is teachable. Well, if it wasn't teachable, we wouldn't have this class. Let's just put that aside. All right. So how we go about teaching leadership is the methodology that we need to look at. Yes, Janet.
So just giving you a message from Sparkle. She said her internet is giving trouble at the moment. That's why she hasn't joined class yet.
Okay, I see you.
All right.
All right. Oh, by the way, I posted in the chat a little later this evening an invitation um, to attend a workshop that's going to be put on through the president of the college and the Imagine Media International Limited. So those of you who might be interested, now they haven't worked out the nitty-gritty of this, of when, not when, but more the modality. So any of you all who might be interested, it might be a face-to-face session. Not certain about it, but I am hoping that it might be online, because you might be quicker to attend online to do this thing. But I know they want to do a combination of online and face-to-face because of the nature of what that thing is. So any of you all who are interested in attending, as we get more information, I'll try and put it up. All right. So I hope everybody, thanks for the information. I hope everybody is okay with the concept here about leadership being a teachable activity. Of course, we wouldn't be in this class if that wasn't the case. All right, so here now we start to look at the origin of definitions of leadership. So here we're going to start our historic walk back into leadership studies, and the development of the leadership theories that we're going to be looking at. So interestingly enough, the word leader doesn't meet or emerge in the written word until about the 1300s. And the word leadership didn't emerge until the 1800s and was primarily utilized in the political sphere. Formal definitions started to develop, but just very few. This is up to from 1900s to 1929, which is just before World War, well, just after World War One, and in between World War One and World War Two. So that's an interesting thing. So that here. In the 1980s, from that point to the 1980s, you now had 110 definitions of leadership created primarily in the area of academia. You had 221 definitions found in books, other scholarly publications. You had 366 publications on leadership that don't include formal definitions. So the whole concept of defining what is leadership and what is a leader is still a vague item coming up through these time frames. The earliest definition that this author looked at was from 1906, defined leader as the preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of control of societal phenomena. So this definition is the beginning of the whole thing of comes to mind is the puppet master definition, because here you have this nefarious person in the background who's maintaining control over people, you know, pulling their strings and influencing them to do things. So um, it describes the leader as one person controlling everybody else or inducing other people to do things for their good, not necessarily for their own. Interesting definition that. Contemporary definitions, which is more thing, describe leadership as a relational process based upon mutual goals, moving towards some action or change. So you have this huge dichotomy between where leadership started to where we've ended up, as the relational leadership model speaks to, you know, people working together to achieve some positive goal. So that whole concept of leadership being an influence type of master puppets behavior to the relationship that we've developed between others is something that we're going to be looking at, the process of moving between those two polarized positions of what leadership is all about. All right. Um, so let's see. So remember we talked about the spheres of leadership that we look at through politics and so on. So remember, now what we're going to be looking at is we're going to be looking at how leadership developed with the application of anthropology, psychology, history, sociology, the arts, philosophy, and all the other interdisciplinary, especially management studies, as management changed over time frame, became a more scientific approach to management. That's part and parcel of how leadership studies started to become such an important element as well. Now, today we know that there's no one correct definition, and that's because we viewed leadership differently. So, what is the purpose of leadership? And deciding the definition that best fits the leadership definition, we have to give it the context that it needs to be looking at. All right, so here we go. All right, I need to make this a little smaller so you can see the top. So in terms of defining leadership, they started utilizing a metaphor to really speak to what leadership was. So you have the competitive market metaphor. So the competitive market is one in which you're looking at the basis here of economics. So in the competitive market, who survives? The strongest will survive. So that's actually kind of based on Darwinian thinking. All right. The administrative metaphor would be the metaphor that those who are in charge are the leaders. Those who have risen to positions of authority would rise into power. The collective bargaining metaphor is the ones that are able to collectively gather the most amount of support would be the leaders. The democratic metaphor would be those metaphors that have the most votes, consensus, the most support. Anarchy, the most amount of appeal in terms of where the mob wants to go. Independent judiciary, that has to do with jurists posting their opinions to something, and the majority rules in terms of the jury, you know, type of situation. And this last one, that I can never pronounce properly, the plebiscite, that has to do with the people and what they want, that type of thing. These are the various metaphorical. I can never get this right. Let's try and get this right one time. Copy and go into, bam. Here we go. Let's see if you all can hear it. Oh my God. All right. You all heard that? Plebiscitary. That's how it's pronounced. Whoa. Anyway, has to do with the people and their decisions of how things should go. All right. Okay, so these are metaphoric definitions. So what they're trying to do here is use a metaphor that people were familiar with to try and define leadership based upon that particular concept. It's sort of like how do you explain something in any in in any concept or in any particular type of activity. What you try to do is you try to find something that people are familiar with and make a comparison to it. So you might use football or basketball or something that people, sports metaphors, to be able to explain leadership functions and behaviors based upon them. That makes sense? Something that everybody's familiar with. So we might make comparisons to um, common held ideas like carnival and so on to make a type of decision or comparison for us to understand it by making it clearer. So metaphoric examples here, for example, provide us with a clearer or more visual understanding of a concept. This is what we were just talking about. A common contemporary metaphor likens leadership to an orchestra. So this is one metaphor that comes up. So we could think about it from the perspective of who this is leadership in action. This is a picture of a guy who's conducting a whole host of people in an orchestra performing a particular piece and getting unity out of all of them to be able to um, successfully accomplish the performance that is required of um, one particular item that they're producing. Any of you all here are members of or play music by chance? Might get an idea of this. Anybody plays any instruments? Nobody plays an instrument? Interesting. All of you all listen to music, right?
Yes, sir.
Right, but none of you
Yes.
all are any kind of musicians. All right, so hopefully you'll understand this because if you've ever been at a concert, let's go to the jazz musician setup here. So this is the one that you might be more familiar with. If you think of a soca band, when you look at a soca band performing on stage, you see a few people working together. You have a singer in front, you have people at the background doing a number of things. You have a singer and performer and that kind of stuff. So these are the things that band leader, just take out the word jazz, because any band leader has to do this. They have to choose the music, find the right musicians, do the performance in public, right? Because I mean that's the way you kind of get people to understand and know your music. The effect of the performance depends upon a lot of things. The environment, so the environment will include the arena that you're playing in, the sound system that you're working with, all those types of things, even the effects that you're using, the lighting to create the mood and that type of stuff. I mean, and these days when you go to a show, you want to be entertained because you're paying a lot of money to go to these parties, right? And then you all went to fets during the carnival season. I know there's a time in my life I never used to miss a fet. Hard to believe, but I used to play in a band and I used to go to a lot of these fets and I used to be looking at the environment in particular. The lighting was good, the sort of stage effects that was going on, the stage management. Then the next thing, who's in the band? You had to have skilled people. But just being skilled doesn't mean that you're going to play well as a band. You need everybody to perform both as an individual and as a group because, right, fine, you could really play an instrument, but can you play your instrument with somebody else, staying in time and using that your creative skill to embellish each other as both as an individual and as a group. And I've worked with a number of musicians where they're excellent musicians by themselves, but when they get into a group, they're non-functional. They're unable to you know, to play off of other people. They know their chops basically, but they really they look to stand out rather than work in the group. All right, and that a leader has to be looking at that, because he might therefore then drop off that person and say, okay, I'll take somebody who's not as skilled, but I'll take somebody who will be able to listen and work with everybody else, as opposed to, because there's a dependency on everybody to work together to bring out the best in everybody. Now this then speaks to another metaphor that we could bring up here. Let's say a football team. How many of you all have follow football? When I say football, I'm talking about soccer, okay, just for the distinction. Or looked at the last World Cup that took place. Probably everybody. Your lack of Justin, did you take part in the yes, Janet. All right.
Yes, sir. I looked at the football.
Okay, great. So hold on, somebody's hand was up and I wanted to call on them. Jaylene, not Jaylene, Jailal. Who was your team?
Argentina.
Yeah, right. Everybody wanted that, you know. Before Argentina became who they were. Who was your team? Argentina. All right, okay. Why Argentina?
Truth, sir, because Messi was in the team.
Yeah, okay. All right. All right. Okay, but fortunately, because we've seen in the past that not because you had the world's greatest player in your team does your team actually do well. We've seen numerous times that the individual in the team does and their skill level does not automatically translate to the dominance of the entire team. You know which World Cup that actually proved itself to be? The one where Spain won with what was that guy? Oh God, the little twerp. God, he was the midfielder who was making everybody look good with his passing. Anyway, that guy, that team, that Spanish team was made up of a lot of players that came from one of the, I think it's Real Madrid team. And that was one of the reasons why Spain was able to take the cup that year, because of the fact that they were playing an international side with a lot of players who had a lot more time playing together in one team in Real Madrid. And that was really interesting. So at the end of the day, your success is dependent upon the weakest individual in your group. And the ability of a good band leader is to bring that weakest person up to a level that allows everybody to perform well. That's something that you have to be looking at. So even at a four-piece band like this, if you have a strong trumpeter, but there's poor backing from the other members, he's going to sound like crap, because without a strong background, a strong foundation, especially between the bass and the drums, these other players will have a lot of issues in order to perform at their best. So a band leader has a lot of responsibilities to be able to do that. So this metaphor of the jazz band is one that describes a leader who has to not only be good himself, but also has to bring out the best in others. And this is one of the metaphors that I found actually quite useful, because I play music and I've been in bands in the past. And so I found this one was one that spoke to me even easier than everything else. But I can see the sports metaphor coming up. I can see the music metaphor. Anybody can see
So
another
what
metaphor.
about our steel pan?
Correct.
They
Even
have
the
to be
steel
in
pan.
sync as well.
Yeah, but no, but any musician, because instead of just looking at instruments from this perspective as those that we know as windblown and so on, but you gotta remember the bass is taken up. You still have a drummer. The drummer sets the rhythm section. So you have a drummer, the iron guys, and all them fellas with the congas and stuff. That's the rhythm section. The bass would be all of the low end drums. So you start with the the big well, for those of you who are familiar, you have the 12 bass, you have the 4 bass, you have the 8 bass, you have the cellos. They all fall into that bass category. Then you have the tenor pans, which take up the lead, single tenor, double tenor. You have the double seconds. Then you have the guitar pans, which are bringing up the center, which is more like the strumming that you started here. So there's a whole set of different voices that the leader of that band generally is not a player, because he has to stand outside and look and listen to what's happening to ensure that the performance that is being set up is one that brings everything together. So any of you all play pan? And if you play pan, then why didn't you say you played an instrument? Or are there just pan aficionados here? No? I'm going to have to start calling on people. All right. This is another metaphor that was utilized here. This is Russ, and he's talking about metaphor of leadership as a episodic affair. And what he's really referring to is that even if you are a leader, it doesn't mean that you're a leader every second of every day or every minute that you're in the building. You're a leader or do leadership things only a few times within the day or within your activities for any time and thing. So you're only going to be operating in a leadership capacity at some specific time, and then at other times you're involved with other types of activities. So that's basically the thing. So that out of a 8-hour day, you might spend 1 hour as acting from a leadership activity. The rest of the time you're doing basic stuff like which we call your operational duties. If we think about it from a management point of view, when you have meetings, then you might be engaging in some leadership type activities. If you are disciplining people or giving instructions, that might be leadership opportunities. But other than that, you're reading a report, you're writing this. Those are episodic periods in which you're engaging in sort of leadership activities. The rest of the time you're involved with the operational activities of an organization. And in fact, we'll look at a model that kind of tried to distinguish that. All right. Think about if you're a parent, think about how much time you spend doing operational things like making a meal, cleaning the house, that kind of stuff, as opposed to being a leader in your household. In terms of disciplining your children, getting them to do what you need to do, getting everybody to organize themselves. Those are the leadership episodes that you have, but they're not every second of every day, because they are routine things that you're going to be engaged in that are not leadership in things. They may be leadership in one other sense, in that you're leading by example. So if you are the one who's leading by example, picking up after your messes and being responsible and looking after them, those are leadership moments. But again, they don't go on forever. When you sit down watching television and enjoying yourself, that's not a leadership activity, that's just routine. Okay, so those are the things that I talk about in terms of the episodic type of activities that you get into. So now we start to get into the theories. And in order to look at the theories, what we want to look at is a lot of the background into it. So leadership is exclusive, it's complex, it has a multidisciplinary nature. It has been examined by behavioral scientists, and it has many aspects to its activities. That's one of the reasons why management is such a difficult field to kind of capture and get a hold of. Leadership was at one point in time thought as being a relatively simple thing, but as more and more research was applied to the phenomenon, they realized that it was a very complex phenomenon, and this is something that would negate the idea that common sense is all you need for understanding, for being a leader. Yes, common sense has its role, but there there's a lot of more complexities involved in the leadership thinking and leadership process. So we have here, despite the criticisms and shortcomings, we have a number of activities that and research that was done that has led to some interesting positions that we're going to be looking at. So the leadership theories that we're going to be looking at, and you would have seen a slide that I've done in chapter 1. We have the great man approach, we have the traits approach, we have the behavioral approaches, situational context, influential theories or the influence theories, the reciprocal leadership approach, chaos theories. Those are the different theories that we're going to be looking at. Now, before we engage in that, I want to give us a little break because we have a lot of slides to go through in terms of the theories. I'm going to try and get all of them done, but I may not be able to complete all of them. In this class, I would encourage you to go through the rest of it because it's basically going to be outlining the number of theories, the different theories that we're going to be looking at. Would it be okay if you all take a little break now? I have a 6:42, so we should be back by 7. That'll be fine?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir.
All
Yes,
right.
sir.
All right, get some rest. Take a walk, take a stretch, try and get yourselves organized. All right.